Yeah, well, one button forward, one button back. All right, we're live. All right. Good morning, everybody. Oh, it's been too long since y'all have been in person. Good morning, everybody. There we go. Welcome to the 6th Agricultural Plastic Recycling Conference. My name is Gene Jones. I'm Executive Director for an organization called the Southern Waste Information Exchange. We're a small nonprofit organization out of Florida that assists industry and municipalities with waste issues. Got our foot in the door on this subject matter for me back in 1999 when I was asked by the Department of Environmental Protection to bring together stakeholders to talk about agricultural plastics in the state of Florida. And I'm still doing it. It's a very interesting subject matter to talk about. There's a lot of great opportunities, but there are also a lot of obstacles that we will come across, as many of you know here in the room. Let me just start off by saying thank you for your attendance. We are doing this as a hybrid event. We're doing it both in person for those in the room having a seat and those joining us online virtually. Let me just make the opening comment. I've done enough of these events now that I can't guarantee that something's not going to go wrong. We will probably run into some type of problem, but I can guarantee you that the guys in the back of the room, which is why they are there, Tim and David, will do what they can to solve the problems and get us back on track. I used to do all the AV myself for my prior conferences. No more. Not doing it anymore, especially nowadays. If you allow me, let me kind of open up and make a couple of general comments. First off, let me take care of the admin stuff. All the presentations that you're going to see, we're going to shoot the PDF and we're going to make that available to everybody post-event. So you'll get that along with all the recordings. And one of the advantages to doing these hybrid events is we're now able to video record everything. So we will videotape the sessions and then also make that available to everybody. So you can come back and if you want to catch a presentation that you may miss or you want to go back and see again. If everybody will do me a favor, silence your cell phones. I would appreciate it. If you have any problems, you can see myself, Norbert, who's standing in the back of the room, or my wife, Dana, or our 2 girls that are out there, Brittany or Taryn, and we'll help you. Bathrooms are just right down the hall. All the food functions, receptions from this point forward will be in the exhibit hall. So the morning's breakfast tomorrow morning, the breaks this afternoon, as well as our reception tonight. I do have a handout table in the back of the exhibit hall, or actually it's in the front of the exhibit hall. So if anybody has any materials they want to place out, please take advantage of that. I need to thank our sponsors because if it weren't for them, an event like this wouldn't be possible at all, especially this year. So a big shout out to Driscoll's, APRC and Doc 7, as well as our contributing partners that have helped us get the word out about the event. This session that we're going to be talking about now is going to be moderated by Dr. Tannis Thorlakson with the Senior Environmental Manager for Driscoll's. And I've gotten to know this lady over the last couple of years because of her work in the sustainability area, trying to help solve. It's great when you have a corporate partner that understands that this issue needs to be looked at and needs to be solved. And so when you've got corporate partners involved in this, trying to drive the train, it's a tremendous help. So I'm going to turn it over to Tannis and let her drive this session. And I hope everybody is going to enjoy the conference. I think you're going to, one of the values of being in person is the networking. Sorry, our virtual folks. Hopefully you'll be able to make it next year. But I encourage everybody to network, reach out, and try to learn what everybody's doing. In fact, if we have some time during one of the sessions, I might make that available and ask everybody to stand up and say who you are, what you do, and why you're here. So hopefully we'll get a chance to do that at some point during the next day and a half. Tannis, all yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As introduced, my name is Tannis Thorlakson. I lead environmental efforts for US and Canada at Driscoll's, the major berry producer, which uses a lot of plastic, as we all know. So really great to be here. Before I kick off our fantastic panel, I wanted to introduce something I'm very excited about, which is our Ag Plastics Innovation Challenge. So this is in collaboration with Think Beyond Plastic, a nonprofit, as well as a number of our industry partners, as shown on the screen, Cal Giant, GemPack, Anna Berries, Nature Ripe, and Good Farms, really coming together as a berry industry to say, how do we address and innovate in the agricultural plastics space? So really looking for all of you to think about and kind of bring new ideas into this space. So we have 4 tracks: new materials, better collection that will improve recyclability, waste to energy, and new designs. And this can be any kind of field plastic, so agricultural plastics, whether that be mulch film, near and dear to my heart, given the challenges with recycling, drip tape, hoop plastic, etc. You can find out more on this web link down below, and it'll be launching in September. So you can go to that website and sign up for more information. Please tell your friends. We're really excited to get folks from across the industry, academia, students to think about this and innovate in this space. So with that kind of brief public service announcement, I'll now switch over to our fantastic panel. I believe first up, we have Jan Bauer on the circular economy of agricultural plastics in Europe. He is literally in Europe, so he'll be joining us via a pre-recorded video. So I think we'll go to that video now, and really excited to hear from Jan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jan Bauer, General Manager from RIGK. I would like to present you today the circular economy of agricultural plastics in Europe. But first of all, I would like to say thank you to Jean for inviting me again to present at your conference. Yeah, sorry for not being with you in person, but hopefully next time this will happen again. I start with my presentation now. So what's on the menu today? First of all, I would like to introduce our company, RIGK. After that, I would like to present the German collection system Erde. And then I will talk about the collection systems and results in Europe. And last but not least, I will draw a conclusion. Our company, RIGK, was founded in 1992 by the plastics industry. The business purpose is the development and organization of collection system for packaging and plastics. And we started with industrial systems, meaning systems for industrial packaging. And now we are also active in the agricultural area. We have 40 employees in Germany. Our headquarters are in Wiesbaden, and we have a sub-branch in Romania, in Bucharest. The German collection system for non-packaging agricultural plastics is called Erde. And Erde is an initiative founded in 2013 by the producers and suppliers of agricultural plastics. Erde is an affiliated organization of RIGK, and RIGK is the Association for Plastic Packaging and Films in Germany. Erde is furthermore a member of APE Europe, which is the European organization. I think in a former conference in San Diego, also Bernard Lemont was present, who is the president of APE Europe. RIGK is the system operator of Erde, so that means we manage all the logistics and we are responsible to reach the recycling targets. In Erde, we have now over 20 members, as I already said, plastic producing companies in different fractions. So we have companies that produce silage film, we have companies that produce stretch film, We have companies that produce nets, yarns, asparagus film, perforated film, and PP nonwoven. What did we achieve in the last year? So as you can see, we have reached a steep curve of collection quantities in the area of silage and stretch films, which is actually the biggest fraction in Germany. So we could reach to collect 26,910 tons in 2020, which means we recycled actually 51% of silage and stretch film in this year. So we have reached the targets out of our voluntary self-commitment, despite the situation with COVID. And all this material is actually recycled 100% within the European Union. So how does the collection actually work? We are working nationwide, with collection operators that first of all are collecting at distribution chains, meaning we are collecting at the agricultural distributor, at local collection points. In 2020, we had 543 collection points of these local ones, but we also collect directly with containers at the farms. In 2020, we had 1,936 collections on farm. What is very important in all this process is the quality control. RIGK has special staff that controls the films at the collection points. You see the nice guys here on the left. Because if the material is coming into the system very dirty, like you see it on the bad pictures here, we have a lot of problems in the steps after that. Yeah? So that means if we have bad material coming inside, the process will not work very well until the end. So that means no recycling is actually possible. As I already mentioned, we have a voluntary commitment. That means the industry handed over a commitment to the environmental ministry in Germany, where we have set ourselves targets. And the first target was a recycling rate of 50% for all silage films in 2020. And as you could already see, this target was reached. The next target will be very ambitious. In the next year, 65% recycling target. So now we take a look at Europe. First of all, the legal background. We do have EPR directives on packaging. We have a lot of legislation coming now with the circular economy package from the EU. But we do not have any specific legislation in relation to non-packaging farm plastics. Yeah? Some countries have introduced national legislation like Ireland and Iceland, but the majority of the initiatives are based on voluntary agreements, like you saw in the example of Germany. But now there is a study going on from Onomia, a very famous consultants company in Europe, and they do a special study on agricultural plastics, which will be published in 2021. And this study should determine political measures. So we will see what comes out of this study and how the process will go on. The recovery rates for agricultural non-packaging plastics, so we are not talking about pesticide containers, is in the moment 55% recycling rate all over Europe. We have 32% going to energy recovery. This is mostly the case in Northern Europe, and still 13% going to landfill. As you know, or as you might know, we have also a European association. It's called EPRO, that has a special working group on agricultural plastics, and in EPRO all the systems are members, and we are sharing our knowledge there and our best practice in order also to develop new systems and in order to get our systems better at home. And you can see we have members from all over Europe, but we are also open and happy to have members from Canada, New Zealand, hopefully someday we will get a new member also from the United States. So if you are interested in sharing information and in the development of best practice, in this case, just let us know. What are the key principles of the existing European systems, so the mature systems, not only in Europe, but also in other parts of the world? Of course, there must be a commitment from the producing industry based on the consensus. Normally, it makes sense if you have already 80% market participation in one fraction, because otherwise you will have a competition disadvantage maybe for the company that join the systems. So you need a lot of participation before you start. Of course, a territorial coverage is important. So you need to install a nationwide system. And all clients of the industry should be served in the system, meaning the smaller ones, the bigger ones. This is important. Of course, you have to adapt to local modalities on the operations, meaning in some areas a bring system is the best solution. In other areas, you have to work with mobile collection. And the system has to be based on the shared responsibility model. What does this mean? So in the reverse value chain, every player has to take part and take his responsibility. For example, the producers of agricultural films, they finance the system. The distribution chains, they help to collect the material. The disposal companies, they are doing all the logistical work. And of course, the recyclers recycle the material back to granules, and this regranulates can go back to new products again. And then, of course, you have somebody who's overseeing everything and managing all the different collections and all the logistical projects. And this is the companies like RIGK, the system managers. So, and last but not least, to make economies of scale possible, you need to include as many products of the industry as possible. Because for the farmer, it is the easiest and most convenient way to go to a collection one time and to bring everything he has on the farm. What are the main challenges in these processes? Of course, the contamination of the materials. So as you could see, we have control stuff at our collection points to minimize this contamination levels. But of course, you're still dealing with materials that can be really, really dirty and contaminated. So a special technology is needed at the recycling plants and could also be applied on the field in order to remove the contamination. Furthermore, in Europe, I think it's the same for US and North America. We need more recycling capacity. So there's a lack of around 400,000 kilotons of recycling capacity for these materials. If we want to recycle more in the future, we need for sure more plants in that area. And last but not least, we still suffer from an unstable demand for recyclates, especially in the markets for flexibles like LDPE and LLDPE. What is more or less the status of the current waste management? We already talked about the numbers. So our EPRO members collect around 150,000 tons per year of non-packaging plastics that go to material recycling. We have new APR schemes or systems coming in the UK and Spain. And also we could copy, not actually copy, but copy most of the processes to Switzerland. And we launched a system, or will launch an operative system there this year, and we will start to collect there next year. So what is also a clear result is that countries that have systems in place achieve much better results due to the systematic approach. So, for example, 98% of the collected volumes that are collected in systematic recycling systems can go to recycling. Yeah, some concluding thoughts. All APR schemes in agriculture are based on shared responsibility. As I explained earlier on, the APR schemes are particularly applicable in the case of farm plastics. The sector is very special, the agricultural, and also the system needs to be specialized. So it's a total different system when you collect materials from agriculture than, for example, from households or from the industry. That is clear. So you need special knowledge, and therefore you need a system operator like RIGK or Clean Farms in Canada or other examples in order to manage the system properly. The European EPR model delivers in terms of achieving recycling targets. We saw that with systems involved in this process, the recycling targets can be reached and can be reached more efficiently. And of course, to make the circular economy model work, we need a stable demand for recyclates, and in order to make this flow more stable and also bigger, you need also more recycling capacity, as I said earlier on. So if you are interested also in recyclates coming from this agricultural plastic collection, you can find them on PlusChip. PlusChip is a company or a daughter company from RIGK, and it's a digital platform for recyclates. There you can find recyclates from more than 200 recyclers throughout Europe and the world, from all different types of polymers and plastics. So yeah, just take a look at this site if you are interested in demanding materials that come out of our agricultural plastic systems and also many others. So thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy the conference. I'm sure it will be interesting. And yeah, I hope that we can see each other again, maybe in the next year in San Diego.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we aren't going to be able to do questions with Jan since he's not here. Hopefully he's asleep by this point, but really interesting. Our next up is Dr. Steve Wong, and he's going to be talking to us about the latest updates on export ag plastics amid the Basel Convention amendments. So we'll look forward to the discussion.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the invitation, and also thanks for the opportunity I can share with everybody here about my thought and my experience on plastic scrap recycling. Meanwhile, this is the first conference face-to-face I have since last year. So I'm really excited to share my thoughts with my presentation on this topic. So the talk I have today is latest update on the export of agricultural plastics amid the Basel Convention Amendment enforcement. So what is Basel Convention? This is about control of transboundary movement of waste and its disposal. Let me go through some of the background about this enforcement. So in 2019, the government in Norway, they proposed control of plastic movement, especially hazardous waste. And this proposal was adopted in 2019 May, and mainly is about amendments of Annex 2, 8, and 9. I will go through this one by one later on. So it's about transboundary movement of plastic waste. In this amendment, they try to classify plastic as hazardous waste. So we also will go through, there's an exception. And this was adopted by or participated by 184 parties. When I say parties, it actually means country. Example, like Hong Kong is not a country, so that's why they have parties. And US, surprisingly, is not a party to the Basel Convention. That we will also see what the US can do and what they cannot do. So the enforcement of this, it makes really a lot of impact, partly because before there's always a saying that whatever the developed countries can export, there's always a way developing country can clear from the custom. So this time they really emphasize on export and import. So let's look at these different categories that they classify. To start with, I have this B3011. And this clarify the types of plastic waste presumed to not be hazardous and not subject to the PIC. PIC means prior informed consent. So it is a procedure that each country had to notify. And this also includes a group of crude resins, non-halogenated and fluorinated polymers destined for recycling in an environmentally sound manner and almost free from contamination and other types of waste. Mixture of plastic waste consisting of PGPP or PET destined for separate recycling. I think this is very complicated, when you look at the law, this is the exact text I took out. What it means is what you can export under this 3011 is primarily single stream, single polymer. There is an exception, which is PEPP and PET. Why they put this as an exception, I guess lawmaker, they probably only know about PET bottles, because this has got label, can be made out of PP, cap also can be PGPP, and also the bottle itself is PET. So this is the way how I look at it. And this is exactly the way how they interpret it. But other than that, the lawmakers at that level, especially the UN level, they don't really know exactly what we are doing in our recycling industry. That's why we need a lot of participation with the UN environmental program. And then the next thing, just now I mentioned about fluorinated polymers and also halogenated material. So these are the hazardous, and these are the one especially with flame retardant, with we call it POP, persistent organic contamination. So now I look at 3210, and this is the scrap, as they always mention waste. So I've always mentioned about scrap in our industry, material in our industry, but then when they come to Basel Convention, they always mention about waste. Everything is waste. So I just sometimes, I use scrap instead of waste. But anyway, this waste and presumed to be hazardous and also subject to PIC. Again, with this scrap or waste, US is not allowed to export because US is not a member. So I will go to this one later on. And this mainly involved in hazardous because this has also halogenated substance. And we can give example is e-scrap material because a lot of like TV or electrical appliances, they make out of flame retardant agent, or they have contamination of flame retardant agent as an additive. And the next one is Y48. So this is a mixture of waste, unless hazardous, not under A3010 or fall under A3010, and also presumed to be not be hazardous, which fall under B3011. Movement restricted to Basel Convention Party countries with PIC, and EU countries cannot export to non-OECD country. That is also mainly primarily developing countries without PIC. And I also give example, municipal waste is an example. Although I just mentioned about PEPP, PET, you are allowed to export. On the other hand, like mixed rigid plastic, although you see a lot of shipment going to the Far East, and strictly speaking, agricultural materials also not allowed to be exported. So next I look at will be, as I just mentioned, B31 is the most popular scrap or waste that you can export. And other than that, anything under A3010, Y48, this involves complicated procedure. And as I mentioned just now, US is not allowed to export anything under this two category. And many countries in Southeast Asia, they adopted the Basel Convention Amendment in their own national rules. So I also give example because we have plant in Hong Kong, we know what we can import, what we cannot import, and the Hong Kong government or environmental agent, they actually have a guideline that you're only allowed to import anything that not more than 0.5% contamination. Whereas in Malaysia, they have the limit up to 5%. And when we just now talking about almost free from contamination, later on we also will see how shipping line interpreted this, and also how each individual country will look at it and interpret it. That also gives lots of confusion. So there are major impacts to recycling plastic scrap export and affected, especially in the US due to restrictions. You might be surprised to see there are lots of export going out from the US, but for long term, this is not going to happen because I think because of the confusion, also because of the COVID-19, there are less inspection of containers in developing country. Now I also look at the situation is because of the limitation and because of restrictions, so we will see more and more local recyclers or more and more scrap or waste going for local recycling. So now I look at issues of how we can comply with Basel Convention rules. Especially, this is a very ambiguous when we talk about what is almost free from contamination. Some country interpret it as 0.5%, some country interpret it as like 5%. There's still argument and there's still a lot of clarification to be talked about, to be clear. And one example I like to give is, at this moment, EU, regardless whether it is B3011, which you can export without prior informed consent, and also the A40, Y48, and also A3210. EU at this moment still have no understanding of what they can export because there's been a lot of discussion, and as well as developing country. So the volume of international trade for plastic scraps has declined I will give example, I will give a number of at least 50% when you look at all these restrictions. We might see some scrap still going out from the country, but might be in terms of like an analysis, in terms of like statistics. Scrap normally classified by HS code, harmonized code. And if you go to the 3915, which is the code for scrap or code for waste, you will see the quantity really drop more than half. And because of this, we also see a lot of factory recyclers are going out of business. And now we also look at present EU countries and many Southeast countries. They still don't have the mutual understanding of the BC Basel Convention amendments enforcement, and also recyclables are banned from export out of EU countries. I think probably ban might be only applied to some of them, but lots of restriction, this is for sure. And different countries have their own rules and shipping lines. It's very, very difficult to see what they can accept, what they cannot accept. I also would like to stress that with the Basel Convention rules or regulations, carriers also have the responsibility to make sure that what they carry or what they take on the boat, right, has to make sure they comply with all the regulations. So this is the reason why we really have lots of challenges or difficulty when it comes to booking of containers. And still we are talking about impact. So we don't really know. Let's see. Yeah. So we're still talking about, now we move to this COVID-19, and with the COVID-19 makes things more worse when it's come to recycling rates, because there's lots of worries about the virus infections and now entail less upstream sorting and supplies. And you can see from the household collections before they do some kind of like sorting, the plastic from paper or from cardboard, and the plastic they separate into different types. Today, I think most of them really go for landfill. And second is a skyrocketing freight rate, shortage of equipment, labor, and delayed in shipments. The challenges that we face or the industry face nowadays. And also cost of logistics and sorting are often higher than selling price. This entails negative margin for low-end materials. I also like to put one point about recycled pellet prices. Today, because of the logistic problem, in the Far East, prime material price nowadays, not all of them, but quite a lot of them are only half, or some of them are even 1/3 of the price of the US prime material. Because of this, there are lots of ways, even they can export the recycler in the Far East is not able to recycle them because of recycled pellets are not really selling as high as what they can afford to do it, or as much as to cover the cost of recycling and also the cost of the freight. And recycling hubs in Southeast Asia are still under lockdown. Especially this is also certainly that they will be they will be able to see, they are not able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or the light of the tunnel, because I give example like Thailand, Malaysia, the infection cases are increasing every day. A lot of lockdown, curfew, restriction of traveling, especially the foreign workers. They had to import foreign workers from Myanmar, from Bangladesh, from the cheap labor cost countries. So at the moment, there's a big shortage of workers. Global plastic problems enormously undermine the interest of recycling agricultural plastic waste by importing countries. So there's a mismatch or imbalance between what they can recycle and also what the availability we have in the developed countries like EU and also the States. So now I move to challenges faced by agricultural plastic export. One of the problem or the biggest problem we have with agricultural plastic is the recovery rate, contaminants. And these would affect export because some of the agricultural scrap or waste only recover maybe 30–40%, especially on the most film. And the most recycled one or the one with less contamination would be like drip tape, drip hose, greenhouse film. But even though when you really look at the cost, it's really, really difficult when it's come to like recycling in the Southeast Asia countries. So in the long run, more infrastructure will be needed at the source for collection, separation, sorting, and descending. And recycling of agricultural scrap will only become a localized business. So this is the trend. I was talking this morning to a machine company that in the future, we will see more and more infrastructure machines are needed for local business because of the restriction of the export, because of the high cost of the shipping and also the labor cost in Southeast Asian country are not necessarily that it's very cheap. And the costs we spend on landfill and incineration should be allocated to recycling, and we face an incalculable environmental cost if agricultural plastic are banned for landfill and incineration. And we also would mandatory recycling for agricultural plastic scrap be an effective option to avoid landfilling and also incineration for low-end plastic scraps. I think the answer everybody probably should know. Okay, now we look at the development, and then we come to the very last point, the conclusion. So the use of post-consumer recycled material and also the role of extended producer responsibility are the keys to increase the recycling rate. I think that has been shared with or by our RIGK this morning. And also recycling and reusing have become a global policy. So the trend is use of recycled content, and everybody talking about recycled content. And collaboration of stakeholder, lawmaker, government, industry, NGO, and the general public are needed to increase the recycling rate and to use recycled content. Let me see. No, I want to go forward. I want to go to my last point. This is the last one. Okay, maybe I look at this one. No, this is also good. So the outlook and also opportunities. We will see use of recycled plastic material is not only for economic reason. Before, people buy recycled material because they are cheap, because they want to lower the cost. But today, the brand owner, either this voluntarily or mandatory, they buy the recycled material because of the need, because of sustainability. And when you look at the price of RPET and also the price of HDPE, these are prices that are higher than plant material. So this is a very good trend and very good move. And secondly, mandatory use of recycled materials is also the trend in the future, as there's a lot of regulation underway, and especially in California, we will see in the very, very near future, recycled content is a mandate for packaging and as well as for bags and other states also will follow. So, and also many states in the US in the process of legislating for the use of recycled content. And I guess this is what I have for today. And I'd like to say thank you. I don't know how to move. Can I move this one? They don't want me to go. Okay. I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. And if you have anything to ask, I have my email address. You can always ask, and especially with regards to the regulation, because I'm also involved in the UN Environment Program, and I'm an observer for Basel Convention, and also for the Plastic Waste Partnership in the UN. Thank you. Oh, yeah. So it's a Q&A here. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, is this on? Ooh, it's on. Great. Well, we have some questions from the audience. As you're thinking about them, please raise your hand and there'll be a mic to start us off. So you didn't paint a super rosy picture about the future of international plastic. What do you see as kind of the future of international trade in plastics? Is the Basel Convention going to end it, or?
No, I think, okay, thank you for your questions. Very, very good question. You know, everybody wants to know the future. Yeah. I think just this morning we were talking about packaging waste. We don't know whether agricultural scrap is going to be a mandate, you know, to use recycled content. I just mentioned about with me involved in the Basel Convention as well as the UN Plastic Waste Partnership. There's been a lot of discussion and still discussing about extending the use of recycled content, not only for the packaging. So there's a discussion going on. And I think this might take time. I mean, like plastic, when I talk about packaging waste, packaging material at this moment, this is going quite well in the sense that there are lots of brand owners voluntarily use recycled content. So that will be the trend, especially you never seen plastic become or under spotlight when you look at like BBC or CNN or this television. So I think the trend will be more and more, especially there will not be any reverse of the Basel Convention, and there's not any reverse of Basel Convention amendment. It will only get more and more tight. Yeah, and at this moment they are talking about how to control. And they also have some criticize about the US because there are lots of scrap going out from this country compared with EU. Yeah.
Okay, questions from the audience. Looks like we've got.
Who ultimately is responsible for policing people using post-consumer products? Who is verifying that these companies are actually using the recycled product?
Thank you for your question. At this moment, as far as I'm involved, as far as I understand, there is no specific things about which organization verify or monitor recycled content. I think that the law requires something like this, and I think it's up to the industry, to make sure that, or brand owner to make sure that when we talk about recycled content, that should be like recycled content in it. Yeah, this is what I see, and also I understand that there's a confusion on this, and it's also a very challenging thing because it's very difficult to tell scientifically whether the recycled material has so many contamination or so many content of recycled material, because especially because okay, now the prime price is for example like $2,000 per ton, and the recycled content can be as high as like 4,000. So it's not too difficult to imagine some recycler they put they put like prime material or non-PCR material in it. At this moment, you know, at that level, there's not really a discussion about this yet. Yeah, I think they're based on the honor system, I would say. You know.
Great. I think we have a question back here.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment that, and maybe you weren't referring to this exactly, but in some regulations, there is some state oversight on the PCR and confirming that it's actually being used. So I just want to make that comment. And there's some certifiers out there right now that are pushing for that more and more. And this, like even the Washington state that now requires PCR, there is some regulation around that. There's room for improvement, but there is some start to what you asked. The one question I had was when you talked about the plastics that, you know, cannot be exported, where do you see ag falling within that currently and in the future? Thank you.
To me, okay. Do I understand that you are trying to ask where I see ag plastics for the export market? If I look at the three category, one is B3011 that you can freely import export without PIC, means prior informed consent. For that, you have to comply with the criteria. I think that with AgFin, because of the contamination, is easily more than a few percent. So strictly speaking, this is not allowed. But you see this film or this scrap or waste still exporting because of like most of the Southeast Asian country. But I also mentioned about whatever you can put on the boat, they can always find a way to import. Yeah. And then here, okay, it's also depending on how you declare it. But this is not important. Okay, the main thing is nowadays is also not cheap. You know, it's not cheap. You know, for the recycler in the Far East to recycle, especially with the skyrocketing rate of the export. And secondly, this is also illegal. So it's not a matter of what you can export. It's also it's also a matter of what they can import. So they might not have inspection on every individual container, but when they have, right, so the exporter has to be responsible. Yeah. And then for the US, because US is not a member, so anything under Y48, which is mixed plastic, except PEPP and PET. So these three mix is okay. And then the other one is P3010. So this is the one with contamination of halogenated substance. So these are not allowed. And then even I think agricultural would probably fall under either Y48. Yeah. And even might not really fall under 3011 because of the contamination. So what you see export, right? Strictly speaking, is not what it should be. I think there's some NGO really criticizing about this point. Yeah. So, and in the future, as I just mentioned, the future recycling industry will be very, very localized because nobody will like to take risk.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one last question up here in the front, and then we'll move on to our next speaker.
As you see countries like Canada and other countries around the world that are designating, if I'm phrasing this correctly, plastic waste as hazardous, do you see the UN as trying to apply a scientifically based approach to these kind of designations?
So can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so recently, you know, for example, Canada has been talking about labeling plastic waste as hazardous materials. And, you know, I think there's plenty of examples where plastic wastes are not hazardous materials, or at least many of us would view that being the case. So I'm just curious, as your involvement with the UN, is the UN involved in any of those determinations around the world or on a global perspective, and maybe even as it pertains to the Basel Convention? And do you see them really trying to apply a truly scientific approach to that as opposed to just a blanket determination?
Thank you for your question. Actually, just now we talk about what Basel Convention about. This is about transboundary movement of waste and its disposal, especially hazardous waste. And not only under Basel Convention, at the same time, we also have a Rotterdam Convention. We also have a Stockholm Convention. It's all about hazardous waste. At UN level, they try to I will not classify, I would say like they try to make sure that plastic waste are not contaminated with hazardous substance. And once is contaminated with hazardous substance, there will be different set of rule and regulation to govern the movement, transboundary movement of it. So I would say that this is a very hot topic in UN to talk about, to make sure that hazardous waste, as this is really harmful for the human being and also for our food chains, so they really have a very, very strict control on this. So I will see in terms of regulation, it's only getting more and more tight. But of course, for enforcement, sometimes it might not be that easy. So at the UN, we also have enforcement body like Interpol, and Interpol also opened lots of containers last couple of years. But as the volume is very, very big, and also the manpower is also not so much compared with what we have to inspect. So they're not able to inspect all the containers. But it happens that I'm also involved in the trade. We also see from time to time, we get containers open. Yeah. So the answer is yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wong, with a fantastic presentation. Up next, we have Ted Kaiser, the ever-changing export market. So quite timely topic to follow up on.
Well, thank you, Tannis, and it's great to be here in person. And thank you to Jean and staff for setting this up. I know it's probably pretty difficult this year getting everything organized for an event like this, but I think it's great to have everybody in the industry together and kind of talk about the challenges and some of the opportunities out there, because we don't get to do it very often, but it's extremely helpful to do so and kind of see what the state of the industry is and what's out there for agricultural plastics. So I'm going to kind of piggyback a little bit on some of the things that Steve talked about. First, I'll talk a little bit about Doc 7, and then I'll probably jump around a little bit to hit on some different things, picking up on what Steve said and some of the trends and challenges and opportunities that are out there for ag plastics as it relates particularly to export. So first, Doc 7 started in 2008. We started doing your typical post-industrial plastics, LDPE films, some post-consumer materials such as PET bottles. And over a couple of years, realized there's a lot of competition for those materials back then. China was still wide open. Lots of companies are competing for that. And so what we saw was a trend to some materials that are maybe bigger in volume and also homogeneous in terms of what type of plastic they are. And so agricultural plastics fit that perfectly. Typically, you have one type of material, whether it's LDPE, HDPE, and yes, you have dirt and moisture and other challenges, but at least it's all one type of plastic. So we started to see a lot of recycling companies, particularly overseas in both China and Southeast Asia, looking for these materials, and started to work into that industry and shipping a little bit at a time, and eventually more and more over the years as more recyclers gain the capability to handle these type of materials. Wash lines and other processing systems were improving with their technology, and both the cost would come down a little bit to make these more feasible. And so a lot of agricultural plastic recycling did start to take off. It's not enough to take everything that's out there, but start to get materials, at least from some places where it was logistically better to do so. So currently now, last year and this year, we've exported quite a bit of agricultural plastic as the market has changed really for the better in the last 2 years. Pricing had been pretty depressed the last couple of years prior to COVID-19. And COVID kind of changed things up a little bit and stirred some more demand for plastics. I think also probably monetary policy and inflation has had a little bit to do with that, and price of oil going up from $30, $40 a barrel now up to the 60s and 70s. So all that has stirred the price of virgin resin going up, and there's a few other factors too, which we'll talk about on the supply side that have also caused agricultural plastic to go up. So we've exported probably about 40 million pounds in the last 2 years of agricultural plastic to about 8 different countries. So there's still, despite all the regulations, there's still quite a bit of places and opportunities where some of this recycling is going on. So we'll just touch base on this a little bit. We all know about the problems with agricultural plastics, and the disposal of them. But there hasn't been a good estimate recently, but the guess is that there's probably around 1 billion pounds of agricultural plastic in the US alone. That's not counting Canada, Mexico, Europe, which Jan talked about a little bit. So the use of these ag plastics are also increasing because it's helping the yield for farmers. And with that being said, it creates further disposal problem because the typical farmer, whether it's a small farmer or a larger corporation, disposal is an issue. And for most of them, they're not too interested in, well, and that may not be fair. Some are very interested in the disposal and proper recycling or disposal of the material, but some are more concerned with the cost of that. And they're farmers. They're not concerned about plastic. That's not their business. So currently, less than 10% of agricultural film is recycled. That could be a little higher in certain locations because you might have, especially domestically, you might have some places where they are recycling some of these materials. But overall, there's a lot of agricultural plastic that's not being recycled. One other trend that's in the background of all this is that you do have increased demand for post-consumer resins out there. In particular, a lot of the agricultural plastic is polyethylene, especially a lot of LD and LLD. And the good news is that those two types of materials are among the fastest growing for PCR demand. Certainly there's others too for HDPE and polypropylene, but given that the bulk of ag plastics are LLDPE and LDPE, it's important to have some or see some good trends going on for PCR demand in that area. The slide got a little cut off there, but just some of the overall issues going on in the export market. You have a pretty strong demand for recycled plastic and plastic raw materials with the economies reopening after COVID-19. That can be a little bit choppy as you still do have some shutdowns going on in certain places, but overall the trend in the past year and a half has been economy surging forward and more demand for materials. That's also been driven too by a scarcity of supply. When you had lockdowns, you had stores that weren't taking returns of bags and films from consumers. You had disruptions that were causing supply decreases from MRFs and other facilities. So that kind of drove up some demand too. You had less post-industrial and post-consumer material out there, and some of the recyclers were looking for ways to fill the gaps, and agricultural plastics was one of those. You also have logistics issues, and those logistics issues are also causing scarcity of supply. If you can't get raw material into your factory in a timely manner because you can't get space on a vessel or there's other delays, that's going to affect what you might do to try to get more material as well. And as I kind of talked about a little bit, you have some inflationary pressures too that are driving up the cost of everything. Steve talked quite a bit about the Basel Convention, so I won't talk too much on that other than that those restrictions, as Steve kind of mentioned, there's still a very gray area in a lot of places, and a lot of countries don't know how to interpret them, or one country interprets them differently than another. Even just in terms of talking about the contamination of those plastics. Well, is that contamination from other plastics, or is that contamination from dirt and moisture? A lot of those details are not clear in the convention, and so it leaves open some interpretation. It also, in some ways, created more demand for US material since the US is not a party to that convention. a lot of exports from Europe and other countries that are party to that convention had stopped to Southeast Asia and some of the countries that are processing agricultural plastics and other films and materials for recycling. So US actually saw an increase in demand for a lot of those materials as well. And then just as I mentioned briefly before, a lot of the equipment and technology for recycling agricultural plastics has improved in the last decade, and also has been more economical. It doesn't cost you 10 million to set up a wash line. You can set up one for less, but you know, there's a lot of different factors there and things that you might want to look at in terms of the size of a system that you're setting up and what kind of water treatment facilities and things like that you have. But that technology has really improved in the past decade. In terms of some of the trends, I touched on a little bit the plastic sustainability, especially for packaging. You're seeing a lot of regulation and also just sustainable or sustainability goals from some of the larger packaging companies looking to set ambitious goals such as 25% or 30% recycled content by 2025. So those are good things from a recycling perspective, because if those companies are going to meet those goals, someone needs to do the recycling and provide the raw materials. Some of the concerns, of course, COVID-19 disruptions, the restrictions that we talked about. You have to watch a little bit for slowing growth in China. They've had some lockdowns recently and slowed down a little bit their recovery from the pandemic. So those are some things to watch. The big one is definitely soaring logistics costs, both on import and export. So from an export standpoint, a little more than a year ago, we were looking at rates that were, you know, maybe $600 to Southeast Asia. Now we're looking at rates that are around $2,000 and still increasing. And on the import side, it's even higher. Containers coming into the US were anywhere from about 3,000 to 4,000 last year at this time, and now they're about 20,000 and going up even more. So the last year, year and a half, basically, has definitely been a logistics nightmare, which does not make it easy for exporting anything, but especially ag plastics, because ag plastics are already a logistics challenge. You have agriculture all over this country in many different places, and it can be quite costly to get it from some of the more remote locations. And actually, that was one of the interesting things looking at what Jan was talking about in Europe and how Germany has their different recycling points throughout the country. And, you know, was thinking about that in terms of something like that here in the US. And it's just so much bigger that it makes the logistics challenge that much more difficult to set up something that would be a similar type of program. So some of the logistics issues in terms of export are shortage of vessel space. It's very difficult to get bookings and space and containers to be able to export these materials out, particularly in a timely manner. So if you're a recycler overseas, you want to purchase something and you would like it to get there in about 30 days. Well, that's very difficult right now. You're lucky to be able to get a booking that can get you something out within 60 days. You also have a lot of challenges. The vessel schedules are not very good right now. There's no integrity to them. So if the vessel's supposed to arrive on September 1st, there's a chance that's going to get delayed. The vessel's going to be sitting offshore and not come in until a week later or 2 weeks later. And when you're trying to plan shipments and get cargo out, it makes it very difficult and potentially very costly. And the problem with agricultural plastics are they're very inexpensive because of the contamination. So if you're trying to ship something out and then all of a sudden you have issues with the dates changing and your costs go up due to that, you've just lost, you know, every part of your margin that you had in there for shipping those materials. There's also a lot of issues with trucking and chassis shortages, both with the actual equipment and trucks and chassis themselves, but also with the drivers. Drivers are in short supply even prior to COVID, and they're still in short supply now, especially as drivers are out with COVID. We just had a lot of issues shipping out of the Memphis area because we literally could not find a trucker who had drivers there. They were all out with COVID. And of course, the rates, as we talked about, are going up for all of that. And the port congestion issues and all that combined really make things very difficult to ship these materials. The long story short is that all this congestion and logistics issues just mean that the prices have to go up. And if the price is going up for the plastic input materials that are going into products such as film and bags and everything else, eventually that end product price is going to be going up and passed on to somebody. So will the export of ag plastics still be viable in the coming years? I'm probably a little more optimistic than Steve on that, but I think the answer is yes, it will be. I think there will always be some export going on, even though I do believe that there will be a lot more recycling done here in the States, or at least some cleanup of material. And I think Steve was alluding to that a little bit, where maybe you have some pre-processing of material here in the States before that material goes export. So cleaning the film just to remove some of the moisture and dirt so it's ready to be processed. And I think that's also just going to be a more natural evolution to doing more here in the States. But I think because of the attraction to ag plastic being one type of plastic, you will still have a lot of places demanding it for export because it is still a valuable raw material. The logistics cost will be a challenge for that, especially the routes and destinations for ag plastic are not China anymore. So those were the cheapest places to ship out from US to go back to China because the shipping line wants to have their empty containers back in China. So shipping to Southeast Asia is more expensive. If things start to move to somewhere else, whether it's the Middle East or other places such as Africa, potentially doing some agricultural plastic recycling, the logistics to get those containers there are more expensive and potentially causing some problems for shipping agricultural plastics to those destinations. But lastly, I think the current trends, are good for agricultural plastics recycling, both for export and for domestic. I think the usage of PCR is only going to continue to increase, especially for LD and LLDP as time goes on. And I think the prices of the recycled plastic will increase and hopefully in some cases even get higher than virgin plastic because packaging companies and other users of these type of resins will be required or just feel the social sustainability pressure to use these PCR raw materials. And that's it. Any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Great. Well, we can take questions from the audience. When you ask your question, why don't we introduce ourselves briefly and say who you're with so we can start to get to know folks around the room. Looks like we've got someone right up here.
I'm Pam Crone with the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And I have a question about what's the advantage to having an export market for ag plastics versus building more localized recycling capacity? What is that benefit? Why is that important to try to do?
Sure. Well, I think in the short to medium term is that there's not enough capacity for it to be recycled here yet. That's one thing. So if it doesn't go export, what happens to it? There are some recyclers domestically who take these materials, but there's not enough to cover everything that's out there. So in the short to medium term, the reason for an export market is otherwise this is going to landfill or being burned or other alternatives. In the longer term, sure, I think more places will be opening to do these materials here, but it's not there yet, both from just a capacity standpoint and also the economics of it. as this PCR trend develops and hopefully does continue to go in the right direction to where the demand and the pricing for PCR from agricultural plastic goes up, then I think you will see more places open up and do it here. And I mean, that's actually the hope. But in the short to medium term, you have to have some other outlets for it as opposed to burning and burying and landfilling.
Dan Fowler from Shell. Does the form of export matter? Like, for example, densified versus bales?
So what would
Like,
matter
can it be
is-
classified as a feedstock versus a waste?
Right. So from a regulation standpoint, it could. It's going to be dependent on the type of material and where it would potentially be going to. So a lot of what we do is baled or rolled, but we still have to take some precautions to make sure those bales and rolls aren't just, full of dirt and mud and look bad. So we want it to be as clean as possible when we export it. There are certain types of materials that may need to be processed further for it to be exportable. Whether that's eventually doing some things where you're shredding and washing and cleaning those materials up a little bit before exporting. The regulations are very much still kind of like a Wild West in that you don't necessarily know what one country is doing versus another, and they can change that, and there's exceptions to that, and it's still very much a lot of unknowns. But we typically want something that's baled or rolled and in a form that's as clean as possible to export, because we would rather not export material that's dirty.
Ben Andros from Andros Engineering. I did. Can you talk a little bit more about the value add part? If we're looking to pivot our supply chain to keep sending stuff out to Asia, and we're going to add some value here, like washing and shredding it before we send it. That's the process that's currently happening over there. How's that going to affect the people you're selling to on the beach? Because that's where they added the value right there. How's that pivot going to look?
Well, I think with any of the value added, it's really a cost benefit issue from two perspectives. So one is just in terms of the actual material itself. Is it beneficial to a recycler that we sell to that the material is more clean? And how much is that worth is the question. And one of the issues with doing those type of things in the States, of course, is cost. So can that cleanup or value added be done at a price that's still competitive for the material to work? That really will depend on the material and what kind of value is going into it. The second piece of that would be from the regulation standpoint. If it comes to the point where certain countries cannot get material in because it's too dirty, and then they have to go for a value added material, then even if the price is higher, they might have to import that. So it's going to be something like that is a little bit of give and take and probably specific to what kind of material it is. But anything would have to take into account the economics of that, and the regulation looms in that as well.
Looks like we've got one right up here. Raise your hand, Theron.
Theron Smith with Revolution Plastics. Kind of going with what Ben was saying there, a year and a half ago, oil was worth nothing. The demand for recycled resin was absolutely nothing. You talked about a lot of extra cost export. If we start cleaning our plastics more before we export it here in California, or in the United States, that's an additional cost. How much is there going to be appetite for PCR in the foreign countries if the prices don't stay up? I mean, we talk about really it's a supply and demand issue. How much is there going to be an appetite for that PCR in foreign countries?
So that's an interesting question. And that's actually a question I kind of wanted to pose to Steve a little bit as well, was to get a sense of where a lot of the PCR in Southeast Asia is going now. and what kind of pricing it's going for as compared to PCR in the US and PCR in Europe, he might be better off to answer some of that part of the question. I do think there's, right, it seems to be that the PCR in Southeast Asia is possibly going a couple of different places. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the PCR in Southeast Asian countries, it's all depending on the brand owner. At this moment, there are lots of brand owners, they are starting the PCR. I know for sure that for some of the material like polycarbonate, PS company, not only the company with consumption or company that making packaging, but also petrochemical company. I think this is a matter of time. Yeah, this will happen. But at this moment, for PVP, I don't really see this much compared with the US and also compared with Europe. But at the same time, I also see PCR exporting from Southeast Asian country to the US. But this is going to be worldwide things, because at this moment it's only mainly primarily voluntarily use of recycled content, but in the future it will be mandatory. Yeah, this and also when it comes to mandatory, I give you one example. The whole world makes about 370 million tons of plastic, and when the whole world require 30% of recycled content, we are talking about more than 100 million tons. At this moment, we don't have 100 million tons of scrap, or waste. And even in China, before they closed the border, there was only about 7 million tons of scrap exporting to China. And China is, at that time, was the most recycled countries. So in the future, there will be like shortage. But of course, we have to look at the recycled content mostly applied to natural in color. In this case, we talk about PET flake, only natural. But the color one or the mixed color one still have no demand or less demand. And then when it comes to HDPE, again, this mainly the natural one have a exceptionally high price. But when it comes to other material, it's not as, or like LDPE mixed color. And so far, I think from agricultural film, we have mostly mixed color, or the natural color is not as much as like PET, really transparent. So it's a matter of time. At this moment, we just have to wait. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think Steve mentioned it a little bit before. When really in the past 2 decades, the main purpose of having recycled plastic done was because of cost, because it costs less than virgin. So that's why companies wanted it. Now things are changing because you have these sustainability goals, possibly regulation, that this recycled content has to be used in these products. So the more and more that happens, that kind of changes the dynamic. If you look at kind of what's happened with PET bottles over the years, originally, the reason for recycling PET bottles was, oh, okay, it's cheaper than virgin plastic. So we mix some in and now we've got a recycled material in our polyester fiber or our products such as those that are non-bottle, non-food grade. Now it's different. It's that you have Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, that they have to have their bottles be recycled. So now that value content is different. You have a dynamic where they want less virgin, they need the recycled. So if that changes for some of these other materials too, I think that's going to kind of drive what happens. And that's been different than what has typically happened in China and Southeast Asia before, whereas this was more of a cost thing, that the recycled content or the recycled pellet costs less than virgin. But now it's going to be because the market is demanding that recycled content.
Hi, Ted. I'm Debbie Hill with Encina Development Group. We are a chemical recycler and presently taking plastic waste back to a monomer through our reactors. And you made a statement that about 1 billion pounds alone in the US is available. Only 10% has actually been recycled. Of that 90% that's left, in your opinion, how much do you think is really viable for a company like Encina to take in and effectively recycle it?
Right. So two things. So number one is the 1 billion pounds. That was an estimate from a study a couple years back, and they even admitted in that estimate is that they really have no idea because no one's really done a calculation of it. So it could actually be much higher, especially because you have the use of these increasing so much. But in terms of what's viable, it really comes down to a logistical assessment based on location. So, depending on where your facility is, looking at what type of materials are in those areas and how those can be collected and brought to market, basically. That's really, with any of the agricultural plastics, the whole challenge is logistics. You have farms that are spread out, and how much material can be reasonably collected at the right economics to do
Yeah,
so.
right now, I'm looking at the East Coast. That's where the plant will be in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So
Well,
I'm
there's
trying
lots
to-
of material, and a lot of it that's just being burned or not, collected, especially mulch films. There's mulch film in New Jersey that, not too far from where I am, that they were taking it in for years and hoping to export it, and now it's just sitting there.
Well, we're hoping that it doesn't get exported and it stays in the US,
Right. Well, they have no,
Right.
well, what I'm saying is they had no market for it. So they
Right.
collected it, brought it in, thinking they would have an export market for that particular type of material, fell through, and now there's no solution for it. So it's.
But there is, well, potentially there will be, with
Right.
Encino. What we're trying to find out is, would you say 50% could be a viable supply for
Well,
feedstock?
you would have a long time to get collection established to do so, but you can, sure, you can build up. If there's a market for it, someone's going to find a way to get it to market. It's just a matter of the logistics to do so, and how do the economics of that work? How far out can you go from your facility to collect and bring it in? Because it's all just logistics costs. How do I get it from the farm, pick it up, or have somebody bring it to me? How do I transport it to the facility where it needs to be processed? And it's all just comes down to logistics.
A lot of
Great.
challenges.
I think we've got one last question up in the front, and then we'll go to break.
Maybe just a follow-up to that question that you mentioned again, the billion pounds, which whether it's a billion and a half a billion, doesn't really matter. The 40 million also that you export, if you take those two numbers, if you were to do a pie chart of those two numbers, what would I'm assuming the biggest slice is LDPE film, ag film. Is that true or not true? And if so, what would be the top 2 or 3 slices of that pie?
Definitely LD and LL probably combined is the largest, but you do have a lot of HD or MD in some cases. A lot of drip tape, drip hose are something in between. Those are the biggest ones. You do have, of course, polypropylene from twine and rope and some other materials as well. So I haven't seen any good study or estimate on that, but just based on kind of personal experience, polyethylene combined LD and HD is probably 80%, 85% of that. Those are definitely the largest of those. The other thing too, that's talking about or estimating 1 billion pounds used every year, because a lot of these materials are only used for one season or 1 year and turned over. So even if you look at like the 40 million pounds that we've done in the past 2 years, that's material that could have been from multiple years and multiple seasons. That wasn't necessarily all material that was collected in 2021. So in terms of total ag plastic that's out there, it's even more than that, because there's so much that's probably sitting in places and or buried or burned and landfilled.
Fantastic. Well, let's join me in thanking our all of our panelists for this great conversation. And I believe there's coffee next door, and we'll be back at 10:30.